"We will fight to our last breath," declared Sitting Bull, eagle feathers in his hair, gripping a staff as he rallied 3,000 Lakota and Cheyenne warriors along Montana's Little Bighorn River in 1876. Clad in war paint, wielding rifles and tomahawks, they faced 400 U.S. soldiers led by General Custer, resplendent in his blue cavalry uniform, saber gleaming at his hip, galloping toward catastrophe. Historical records confirm Custer's command suffered 280 deaths, while native losses numbered 160, a stark measure of their unyielding spirit. This clash, rooted in the theft of sacred lands, was a defiant cry for native survival. How did 3,000 warriors crush a veteran army, and what fueled their desperate victory against a relentless foe? Watch to reveal the soul of this epic struggle. In 1876, the Battle of the Little Bighorn erupted in the Montana Territory, a brutal collision that would sear itself into the annals of American history. This clash, fought on the sunlit plains, marked a desperate stand by native tribes against the relentless tide of U.S. expansion. Historian D. Brown, in his seminal work Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, describes it as a moment when the Lakota and Cheyenne fought not for conquest but for survival. The battle's roots trace back to decades of broken promises and cultural erosion, with the Montana Territory spanning over 147,000 square miles, serving as a contested frontier where 0 native inhabitants faced increasing encroachment by settlers. Since the 1840s, American settlers poured into the Great Plains, driven by the promise of land and wealth. By 1850, over 50,000 pioneers had crossed the Oregon Trail, many settling on lands claimed by tribes like the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho. These migrations sparked violent clashes, as native hunting grounds, vital for sustaining populations estimated at 75,000 across the Plains tribes, were disrupted. The U.S. government, eager to secure safe passage for settlers, sought treaties to quell tensions. Yet, as historian Robert Utley notes in the Indian Wars, these agreements often served as tools of dispossession, cloaked in diplomacy. The influx of settlers, coupled with the construction of 20 new forts by 1860, inflamed native resistance, setting the stage for inevitable conflict. The U.S. government negotiated the Falkland Army Treaty in the 1850s with leaders of multiple tribes, including the Sioux and Cheyenne. Signed in 1851 near Fort Laramie, it involved 10,000 native representatives from 8 major tribes. The treaty promised annual payments of $50,000 in goods for 50 years and designated specific tribal territories. However, its text, drafted entirely in English, baffled many native leaders, only 10% of whom were fluent in the language, according to linguist John Peabody Harrington. Misunderstandings festered, and the treaty's boundaries, covering 200,000 square miles, were routinely ignored by settlers. Historian Colin Calloway argues in Our Hearts Fell to the Ground that the treaty was less a pact than a prelude to betrayal, as its terms were neither fully explained nor honored. The Falkland Army Treaty's flaws became starkly evident as both sides breached its terms. American troops, numbering 8,000 by 1860, constructed forts like Fort Kearny and Fort Laramie on native lands, each garrison housing 200 to 500 soldiers. These outposts, built without tribal consent, provoked outrage. In retaliation, native warriors, often in groups of 50 to 100, attacked forts and wagon trains, killing an estimated 400 travelers between 1851 and 1860. The U.S. Army responded with punitive expeditions, such as the 1855 Harney Massacre, where 86 Sioux were killed. Historian Pekka Hemelainen notes in the Comanche Empire that these cycles of violence exposed the treaty's fragility, as neither side trusted the other to uphold peace. The escalating raids and reprisals deepened mutual distrust, rendering the treaty a hollow promise. To address the mounting chaos, the U.S. negotiated the Second Fort Laramie Treaty in 1868. This agreement, signed by 150 Sioux leaders, established the Great Sioux Reservation, spanning 60,000 square miles in present-day South Dakota. It guaranteed the Sioux exclusive rights to the Black Hills and barred white settlement. The treaty also promised annual provisions, including 4,000 cattle and 25,000 pounds of flour to support the 20,000 reservation inhabitants. Yet, as historian Jeffrey Ostler observes in The Plains, Sioux and U.S. Colonialism, the treaty was a leash designed to confine rather than protect. Many Sioux, wary of dependency on government rations, viewed the reservation as a trap, and tensions simmered as U.S. compliance faltered. Not all native groups accepted the reservation's constraints. Sitting Bull, a revered Lakota leader, and his 2,000 followers, including 800 warriors, refused to relocate. By 1876, his camp swelled with Cheyenne allies, forming a coalition of 10,000 people. Known for his spiritual vision and defiance, Sitting Bull, often seen in a red tunic with a staff adorned with feathers, rejected U.S. authority. The government labeled these non-reservation natives hostile, deploying 1,200 troops to subdue them. Historian Heather Cox Richardson writes in Wounded Knee that Sitting Bull's resistance embodied a refusal to surrender identity and autonomy. His stand galvanized tribes, challenging the U.S. narrative of inevitable conquest. The discovery of gold in the Black Hills in 1874 shattered the fragile peace. Prospectors, numbering 15,000 by 1875, flooded the Sioux Reservation, defying the 1868 treaty. The Black Hills, revered as the heart of the Sioux Nation by Elder Black Elk, held spiritual significance, with 12 sacred sites documented by ethnographers. The U.S. offered $6 million to buy the region, but Sioux leaders, representing 90% of the tribe's council, rejected it. Historian Edward Lazarus in Black Hills, White Justice calls this refusal a stand for sovereignty against exploitation. The government's failure to expel miners, coupled with 500 new claims staked monthly, escalated tensions as native raids on intruders surged. Undeterred by the Sioux's rejection, the U.S. government issued an ultimatum in 1875, demanding all non-reservation natives report to agencies by the 18th of January 76 or face military action. Only 3,000 of 15,000 off-reservation Sioux complied, leaving 12,000 exposed to attack. The Army mobilized 2,500 troops, including Custer's 7th Cavalry, to enforce compliance. Historian James Donovan, in A Terrible Glory, notes that the ultimatum was a declaration of war, ignoring native rights to roam their lands. The influx of 1,000 miners monthly into the Black Hills further provoked native warriors, who killed 30 prospectors in 1875 alone, signaling their resolve to protect their territory. Sitting Bull's camp, nestled by the Little Bighorn River, became a beacon of resistance. By the 18th of June 76, it housed 10,000 people, including 3,000 warriors, across 1,000 lodges. Located outside the reservation, it defied U.S. demands for confinement. Sitting Bull, often astride a black horse, his face painted with sacred symbols, led ceremonies like the Sun Dance, attended by 5,000 participants, to unify his people. Historian Robert Larson in Red Cloud describes the camp as a fortress of culture where traditions thrived amidst threats. U.S. Scouts, numbering 50, spotted the camp on the 24th of June, alerting General George Custer, whose 600-man regiment was poised to strike. General Custer, commanding the 7th Cavalry, prepared to confront Sitting Bull's coalition. His force, reduced to 400 effectives after detachments, faced a daunting task. Custer, clad in a buckskin jacket, his long hair tied back, rode a sorrel horse named Vic. Known for his audacity, he had led 11 campaigns, winning 8, but his tactics drew criticism. Historian Evan Connell, in Son of the Morning Star, calls Custer brilliant yet reckless, blind to native strength. Encamped 15 miles from the Little Bighorn, Custer's scouts, including 40 Arikara allies, confirmed the camp's size. Yet he dismissed warnings, believing his 400 men could prevail against 3,000 warriors, a miscalculation that would prove fatal. By the 18th of June 76, Sitting Bull's camp stood as a defiant stronghold along the Little Bighorn River, far from the confines of the Great Sioux Reservation. Housing 10,000 people, including 3,000 warriors, it sprawled across 1,000 lodges in a verdant valley. Sitting Bull, clad in a red tunic with eagle feathers braided into his hair, rode a black horse and carried a staff adorned with sacred symbols. His leadership, both spiritual and martial, united Lakota and Cheyenne in a coalition that historian Robert Utley in The Last Days of the Sioux Nation calls a formidable bastion of resistance. The camp's location, 50 miles outside the reservation, openly challenged U.S. demands for compliance, drawing the attention of 600 soldiers under General George Custer. On the 24th of June, 50 U.S. scouts pinpointed the camp, setting the stage for a fateful confrontation. U.S. scouts, including 40 Arikara allies, relayed critical intelligence to Custer, commander of the 7th Cavalry. Encamped 15 miles from the Little Bighorn, Custer received reports estimating the native force at 3,000 warriors, a figure corroborated by Scout Mitch Boyer's count of 1,000 lodges. Boyer warned of the camp's strength, noting its 10-mile expanse along the river. Yet Custer, in his buckskin jacket and wide-brimmed hat, dismissed the caution. Historian James Donovan, in A Terrible Glory, describes Custer's mindset as arrogantly optimistic, rooted in his record of 8 victories in 11 prior campaigns. With only 600 men, including 120 support personnel, Custer faced a 5-to-1 disadvantage, but believed his disciplined cavalry could prevail. His scouts, outnumbered and wary, urged restraint, but Custer's ambition drove him forward. The native coalition, a blend of Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, mustered approximately 3,000 warriors, a force unprecedented in its scale. Led by Sitting Bull and war chiefs like Crazy Horse, who wore a single hawk feather and carried a Winchester rifle, the warriors were equipped with 1,500 firearms, including repeating rifles and 2,000 bows, according to military reports cited by historian Gregory Mickno in Lakota Noon. The camp also sheltered 7,000 non-combatants, including 4,000 women and children, making its defense a matter of survival. Historian D. Brown in Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee emphasizes that every warrior fought for family and future, not glory. This unity, forged through ceremonies like the sun dance attended by 5,000, gave the natives a cohesive strength Custer underestimated. Custer's command, totaling 597 men after detachments, was a fraction of the native force. His 7th Cavalry, organized into 12 companies, included 400 combat-ready troops, 120 support staff, and 77 scouts. Each soldier carried a single-shot Springfield carbine and a Colt revolver with 100 rounds of ammunition, per Army records. Custer, astride his sorrel horse Vic, led with a confidence bordering on hubris. Historian Evan Connell in Son of the Morning Star notes that Custer's 1874 Black Hills expedition, which sparked the gold rush, had inflated his sense of invincibility. Facing 3,000 warriors, his force was ill-prepared for a prolonged engagement, yet Custer's plan hinged on a swift, decisive strike to crush the camp. From a high ridge overlooking the Little Bighorn Valley, Custer surveyed the native camp on the 25th of June, 1876. His vantage point, 500 feet above the river, revealed 1,000 lodges stretching 10 miles along the banks. Scouts reported 3,000 warriors, but Custer, peering through binoculars, misjudged their resolve, estimating only 1,500 fighters. Military historian John Gray in Centennial Campaign argues that Custer's reconnaissance was cursory, blinded by his haste to attack. The camp's size, housing 10,000 people, dwarfed his 400-man force, yet Custer saw an opportunity to strike before the natives could mobilize. His decision to act immediately would unravel his command. Convinced the camp might scatter if he delayed, Custer opted for an immediate assault, a choice that historian Nathaniel Philbrick in The Last Stand calls a gamble born of ego and urgency. With 600 men, Custer faced 3,000 warriors, a disparity that demanded caution. Yet, fearing the natives would flee, as they had in prior campaigns like the 1868 Washita River attack where 103 Cheyenne were killed, Custer prioritized speed. His scouts, including 40 Arikara, reported no signs of dispersal, but Custer's experience 8 victories in 11 campaigns him to believe his 400 combat troops could overwhelm the camp. This miscalculation, rooted in underestimating native unity, set a tragic course. To execute his plan, Custer divided his 597-man regiment into 4 battalions, a tactic that stretched his limited forces. He assigned 125 men to guard the pack train, which carried 20,000 rounds of ammunition and 2,000 pounds of supplies. Another 175 men, led by Captain Frederick Benteen, were sent to scout the southern ridges. Custer and Major Marcus Reno commanded the remaining 297 men, split into 2 battalions of 150 and 147. Historian Robert Utley, in Cavalier in Buckskin, critiques this division as a fragmentation that diluted Custer's strength against a superior foe. With only 400 combat troops facing 3,000 warriors, Custer's strategy relied on surprise, a hope that quickly faded. The pack train, guarded by 125 soldiers and 50 mules, was critical to Custer's campaign. Loaded with 20,000 rounds of ammunition, 2,000 pounds of food, and 500 pounds of medical supplies, it trailed 5 miles behind the main force. Captain Thomas McDougall, in a blue uniform with a kepi hat, led the detail, ensuring the train's safety. Army records show the train moved at 3 miles per hour, slowing Custer's advance. Historian Gregory Micknow in Lakota Noon notes that the pack train's vulnerability forced Custer to allocate 20% of his force to its protection. This detachment, while necessary, reduced Custer's combat strength to 400 men, a critical loss against 3,000 native warriors. Captain Benteen's battalion, numbering 175 men, was dispatched to scout the southern ridges, 10 miles from the main force. Benteen, wearing a grey campaign hat and carrying a Springfield carbine, led 3 companies totaling 120 soldiers and 55 scouts. His mission was to ensure no additional native camps, potentially housing 1,000 more warriors, lay in wait. Historical accounts, including Benteen's 1876 report, confirm he covered 15 miles without finding threats. Yet, as historian James Donovan in A Terrible Glory argues, Benteen's detachment scattered Custer's forces, leaving only 400 men to face 3,000 warriors. This division, meant to secure the rear, weakened Custer's assault. Custer and Major Reno led the remaining 297 men toward the Little Bighorn Valley, a 5-mile descent to the river. Custer, on his horse Vic, commanded 150 men, while Reno, in a blue coat with gold epaulets, led 147, including 30 Arikara scouts. Their combined force, armed with 300 Springfield carbines and 150 Colt revolvers, faced 3,000 warriors across a 10-mile camp. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick, in The Last Stand, describes the valley as a death trap, with 1,000 lodges nestled against the river's bends. Custer's plan to split his 400 combat troops into 2 battalions, each facing 3,000 warriors, exposed his men to overwhelming odds, a prelude to disaster. On the 25th of June, 1876, General George Custer, astride his sorrel horse Vic and clad in a buckskin jacket, issued the order for Major Marcus Reno to launch the initial assault on the Lakota and Cheyenne camp along the Little Bighorn River. Reno's battalion, numbering 147 men, including 30 Arikara scouts, prepared to cross the river's shallow ford, 2 miles from the camp's 1,000 lodges. Armed with 147 Springfield carbines and 70 Colt revolvers, Reno's force faced a daunting task against 3,000 warriors. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick, in The Last Stand, describes Reno's charge as a headlong plunge into chaos, driven by Custer's impatient strategy. With only 400 combat troops total, split across 4 battalions, Custer's plan relied on Reno's 147 men to engage 10,000 natives, including 7,000 non-combatants, in a camp stretching 10 miles. As Reno's battalion forded the Little Bighorn River, 6 feet wide and 2 feet deep, they encountered a swelling tide of native warriors, far exceeding their expectations. By 3 p.m., 500 mounted Lakota and Cheyenne, led by chiefs like Gall, clad in breechcloths and wielding 300 repeating rifles, surged from the camp. Gall, his face painted red, rode a bay horse and carried a tomahawk, rallying 200 warriors in the first wave. Military reports, cited by historian Gregory Micknow in Lakota Noon, estimate the native force grew to 1,000 within 10 minutes, outnumbering Reno's 147 men 7-1. Historian James Donovan, in A Terrible Glory, notes that Reno faced an avalanche of resistance, unprepared for the camp's ferocity. The warriors, defending 4,000 women and children, fought with a resolve that stunned Reno's command. Reno had anticipated support from Custer's 150-man battalion, expecting a coordinated assault on the camp's 1,000 lodges. Instead, Custer, positioned on a ridge 500 feet above, 3 miles away, observed the unfolding chaos. His failure to reinforce Reno, as noted by historian Robert Utley in Cavalier in Buckskin, left Reno's 147 men exposed to 3,000 warriors, a betrayal of tactical unity. Reno's Arikara scouts, numbering 30, reported 800 warriors advancing. But Custer, peering through binoculars, opted to maneuver his 150 men toward the camp's northern end. This decision, splitting his 400 combat troops further, left Reno's 147 soldiers to face 1,000 warriors alone, a disparity that eroded their morale. Faced with overwhelming odds, Reno ordered his 147 men to dismount at 3:15 p.m., forming a skirmish line 300 yards long across a grassy plain, 1 mile from the camp. Each soldier, carrying 100 rounds for their Springfield carbine, knelt in pairs, 5 yards apart, as per Army tactics. Reno, in a blue coat with gold epaulets, stood at the center, saber in hand. The line faced 1,000 warriors, who fired 500 rounds from rifles and loosed 2,000 arrows in 20 minutes, according to survivor accounts compiled by historian John Gray in Centennial Campaign. Philbrick calls this stand a desperate bid to hold ground against an unstoppable force. The skirmish line, meant to pin 3,000 warriors, faltered as 200 Cheyenne flanked Reno's left, threatening to envelop his 147 men. The native warriors, a coalition of 2,000 Lakota and 1,000 Cheyenne, unleashed a ferocious defense of their 10,000-person camp. Chiefs like Two Moon, wearing a war bonnet and carrying a lance, led 300 Cheyenne warriors, while Crazy Horse, with a single hawk feather, commanded 500 Lakota. Armed with 1,500 firearms and 2,000 bows, they targeted Reno's 147-man line, killing 10 soldiers in the first 15 minutes. Historian D. Brown in Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee writes, "Every arrow and bullet was a cry to protect their families." The warriors, moving in groups of 50, used the camp's 10-mile terrain, dotted with 200 ravines, to outmaneuver Reno's 147 troops, whose 100-round ammunition supply dwindled to 60 per man. Custer, watching from a ridge 3 miles north, devised a plan to envelop the camp's northern end, aiming to relieve pressure on Reno's 147 men. His 150-man battalion, armed with 150 carbines and 75 revolvers, moved along a 500-foot bluff 2 miles from the camp's 1,000 lodges. Custer, on Vic, believed his maneuver would force 3,000 warriors to split their focus. Yet, as historian Evan Connell in Son of the Morning Star argues, Custer's flanking attempt underestimated the warriors' mobility, leaving Reno's 147 men to bear the brunt of 1,000 fighters. This miscalculation, dividing Custer's 400 combat troops, allowed 2,000 warriors to concentrate on Reno's crumbling line. Reno's skirmish line, now facing 1,500 warriors, buckled under relentless pressure by 3:30 p.m., particularly on the left flank, where 300 Cheyenne under Two Moon pressed forward. The line, stretched across 300 yards, lost 15 men, with 20 wounded, as 2,000 arrows and 700 rifle rounds struck in 10 minutes. Reno, his saber sheathed, ordered a retreat to a wooded grove near the river, 200 yards away, where 50 cottonwood trees offered cover. Historian Gregory Micknow in Lakota Noon notes, Reno's 147 men, reduced to 112 effectives, faced 1,500 warriors in a tightening noose. The retreat, covering 300 yards, exposed 30 soldiers to 200 pursuing warriors, who killed 5 in close combat. The wooded grove, 50 yards wide along the river's west bank, provided temporary shelter for Reno's 112 remaining men. They dug shallow trenches, 2 feet deep, behind 50 trees, facing 1,500 warriors 100 yards away. Reno, now on foot, rallied his 112 troops, who fired 2,000 rounds in 20 minutes, killing 20 warriors. Yet, the grove's cover, limited to 200 square yards, couldn't shield 112 men from 1,000 arrows arcing overhead. Historian James Donovan, in A Terrible Glory, calls the position a trap, offering fleeting safety against 3,000 warriors. The warriors, using 300 rifles, maintained pressure, wounding 15 more of Reno's 112 men, as 7,000 non-combatants in the camp rallied behind their defenders. Despite the grove's 50 trees, Reno's 112 men faced unrelenting attacks from 1,500 warriors, who crept within 50 yards by 3:50 p.m. The The warriors, led by Gall's 400 Lakota, fired 800 rounds and loosed 1,500 arrows, killing 8 soldiers. Reno's 112 troops, down to 40 rounds per man, struggled to hold the 200-yard perimeter. Survivor accounts, cited by John Gray in Centennial Campaign, describe a hail of arrows that darkened the sky. Historian Robert Utley in Cavalier in Buckskin writes, Reno's 112 men were pinned, abandoned by Custer's 150 2-man battalion. The grove, meant as a refuge, became a choke point, with 1,500 warriors closing in on 112 beleaguered soldiers. Fearing encirclement by 1,500 warriors, Reno ordered a retreat to high ground at 4 p.m., targeting a bluff 500 yards east across the river. His 112 men, reduced to 96 after 16 fell, scrambled across the 6-foot-wide Little Bighorn, pursued by 400 Lakota under Gall. The retreat, lacking a rearguard, cost 10 lives, with 20 wounded, as 1,000 arrows struck in 5 minutes. Reno, his coat torn, reached the bluff with 96 men, who formed a 200-yard perimeter. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick in The Last Stand calls it a panicked flight that cost Reno's 112 men dearly against 3,000 warriors. The bluff, 100 feet above the river, offered 96 survivors, a fragile foothold, as 1,500 warriors regrouped below. As Major Marcus Reno's 96 survivors scrambled onto a 100-foot bluff above the Little Bighorn River at 4 p.m. on the 25th of June, 1876, their retreat left a trail of devastation. The chaotic flight from the wooded grove cost Reno's battalion 16 men, with 10 killed and 20 wounded by 400 pursuing Lakota warriors led by Chief Gall, his face painted red, wielding a tomahawk from his bay horse. The 96 remaining soldiers, armed with 90 Springfield carbines and 40 Colt revolvers, carried only 30 rounds per man, after expending 2,000 rounds in the grove. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick in The Last Stand calls the retreat a rout that shredded Reno's 147-man command into 96 desperate survivors. On the bluff, Reno, his blue coat torn, formed a 200-yard perimeter against 1,500 warriors, while 7,000 native non-combatants in the 1,000 lodge camp below rallied their defenders. General George Custer, 3 miles north on a 500-foot ridge, learned of Reno's plight through 30 Arikara scouts who reported 1,500 warriors overwhelming Reno's 96 men. Custer, astride his sorrel horse Vic, clad in a buckskin jacket, commanded 150 men armed with 150 carbines and 75 revolvers. Seeking to divert the 3,000 warrior native force, he split his battalion again, sending 2 companies of 60 men toward the river. Historian James Donovan, in A Terrible Glory, critiques this move as a reckless division that left Custer's 150 men vulnerable to 3,000 warriors. The 60-man detachment, led by Captain George Yates in a blue kepi, aimed to draw 1,000 warriors from Reno's 96-man position, but Custer's 90 remaining troops on the ridge faced 2,000 fighters, a 22-to-1 disadvantage. The 2 companies, totaling 60 soldiers, descended a 200-foot slope toward the Little Bighorn River, 1 mile from the camp's 1,000 lodges. Each soldier, carrying 80 rounds for their Springfield carbine, faced 800 warriors who emerged from 200 yards of tall grass. Chief Two Moon, in a war bonnet and wielding a lance, led 300 Cheyenne, while 500 Lakota under Crazy Horse, marked by a single hawk feather, joined the ambush. Military reports cited by historian Gregory Micknow in Lakota Noon record 1,000 arrows and 400 rifle rounds, striking the 60-man unit in 10 minutes, killing 8 soldiers. Historian Robert Utley in Cavalier in Buckskin notes, "The 60 men walked into a trap, as 800 warriors used the terrain's 50 ravines to devastating effect. Outnumbered 13-1, the 60 soldiers fired 1,200 rounds, wounding 15 warriors, but faced collapse. The 60-man detachment, now 52 after losing 8 men, retreated up the 200-foot slope to rejoin Custer's 90 troops on the ridge by 4:20 p.m. Pursued by 800 warriors, they lost 5 more soldiers to 500 arrows and 200 rifle rounds from 300 yards. Yates, his kepi lost, rallied his 52 survivors, who carried 50 rounds each, to a 100-yard skirmish line. The returning 800 warriors, reinforced by 200 who had fought Reno's 96 men, swelled the native force to 1,000 against Custer's 142 troops. Historian Evan Connell, in Son of the Morning Star, writes, "The 60-man probe was a futile gesture, costing Custer 13 men, while 3,000 warriors tightened their grip. The 142 soldiers, facing 1,000 fighters, braced for an onslaught across a 500-yard front. Crazy Horse, riding a white horse and carrying a Winchester rifle, led 500 Lakota warriors in a daring flanking maneuver downstream, 2 miles from Custer's 142-man position. Moving through 100 yards of riverbank willows, his force aimed to encircle Custer's 142 troops from the north. By 4:30 p.m., Crazy Horse's 500 warriors, armed with 300 rifles and 400 bows, crossed a 50-yard ford, out of sight of Custer's 30 scouts. Historian D. Brown, in Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, praises Crazy Horse's tactic as a masterstroke that leveraged the camp's 10-mile terrain against 142 isolated soldiers. The 500 Lakota, joined by 200 Cheyenne, threatened to cut off Custer's 142 men from retreat, as 7,000 non-combatants cheered from the 1,000 lodges below. Custer, now commanding 142 men on a 500-foot ridge, organized 3 defensive lines to counter the 2,000 warriors closing in. The first line, 50 men under Captain Miles Keogh, formed a 100-yard skirmish line 200 yards from 1,000 warriors. Keogh, in a blue tunic, carried a revolver and 60 rounds. The second line, 50 men led by Lieutenant James Calhoun, held a 150-yard front 100 yards back. Custer's 42-man reserve, with 30 rounds per man, waited 50 yards behind. Historian John Gray in Centennial Campaign notes, Custer's 142-man defense, facing 2,000 warriors, relied on 7,000 rounds, a dwindling shield. The 142 troops, against 3,000 warriors, prepared for a desperate stand as 1,000 arrows fell in 5 minutes. The first skirmish line, Keogh's 50 men, faced 1,000 warriors at 4:40 p.m., 200 yards from the camp's 1,000 lodges. Armed with 50 carbines, they fired 1,000 rounds in 10 minutes, killing 10 warriors but losing 15 men to 800 arrows and 300 rifle rounds. Keogh, wounded in the leg, rallied his 35 survivors, who retreated 100 yards to Calhoun's 50-man line. Historian Gregory Mickno in Lakota Noon states, "The 50-man line collapsed in 15 minutes, overwhelmed by 1,000 warriors' ferocity." The 35 survivors, with 20 rounds each, joined Calhoun's 50 men, forming a 150-yard front against 1,500 warriors, as Custer's 42-man reserve watched from 50 yards away. The second skirmish line, now 85 men under Calhoun, held a 150-yard ridge against 1,500 warriors by 4:50 p.m. Calhoun, wielding a saber, led 85 troops with 2,000 rounds, facing 1,000 arrows and 500 rifle rounds in 10 minutes. The line lost 20 men, with 15 wounded, as 300 Cheyenne under 2 Moon flanked from 100 yards. Historian James Donovan, in A Terrible Glory, writes, Calhoun's 85 men were a crumbling dam against 1,500 warriors' relentless tide. The 65 survivors, down to 15 rounds each, fired 1,500 rounds, wounding 20 warriors, but faced collapse as 2,000 warriors pressed from 3 sides, 7 non-combatants chanting support. Under mounting pressure, Custer dispatched a 20-man unit at 5 p.m., led by Lieutenant Algernon Smith, to block 400 warriors advancing from a 100-yard ravine. Smith, in a blue coat, carried a revolver and 40 rounds, leading 20 men with 400 rounds. They faced 400 Lakota under Gall, who fired 200 rounds and loosed 500 arrows in 5 minutes, killing 5 soldiers. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick, in The Last Stand, calls this a futile stand that cost Custer 5 men against 3,000 warriors. The 15 survivors, with 10 rounds each, retreated 100 yards to Custer's 42-man reserve as 500 warriors tightened their 500-yard encirclement of 122 remaining troops. The second defensive line, now 65 men, crumbled by 5:10 p.m., with 30 killed and 15 wounded by 1,500 warriors firing 600 rounds and 1,200 arrows. Calhoun's 35 survivors, carrying 10 rounds each, fell back 50 yards to Custer's 57-man reserve, now including Smith's 15 men. Custer, on Vic, rallied his 92 troops, who formed a 100-yard perimeter with 900 rounds. Historian Robert Utley, in Cavalier in Buckskin, writes, Custer's 92 men, facing 2,000 warriors, were a shrinking island in a sea of 1,000 lodges. The 92 soldiers, against 3,000 warriors, braced for a final stand as 1,500 arrows rained down, with 7,000 native voices echoing from the camp below. By 5:15 p.m. on the 25th of June, 1876, Crazy Horse, astride a white horse, his single hawk feather glinting in the sun, led 500 Lakota warriors through 100 yards of riverbank willows to the rear of General George Custer's 92-man position on a 500-foot ridge. This flanking maneuver, completed in 10 minutes, sealed the encirclement of Custer's troops, now facing 2,000 warriors from all sides. Crazy Horse, wielding a Winchester rifle, commanded 300 riflemen and 200 archers, who fired 600 rounds and loosed 1,000 arrows in 5 minutes, killing 10 of Custer's 92 men. Historian D. Brown, in Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, calls this a tactical triumph, as 3,000 warriors outmaneuvered 400 soldiers with precision. The 82 survivors, with 10 rounds each, huddled on a 100-yard perimeter, 1 mile from the 1,000 lodge camp housing 7,000 native non-combatants. The native assault, now 2,000 strong, converged on Custer's 82 men from 3 directions by 5:20 p.m. Chief Gall, on a bay horse, his tomahawk raised, led 400 Lakota from the south, while 2 Moon, in a war bonnet, directed 300 Cheyenne from the west. From the north, Crazy Horse's 500 warriors fired 400 rounds, wounding 15 soldiers. The 82 troops, armed with 80 carbines and 40 revolvers, returned 800 rounds, killing 8 warriors, but their 900-round stock dwindled to 600. Historian Gregory Mickno, in Lakota Noon, notes, the 82 men faced 2,000 warriors in a 500-yard cauldron, with 1,500 arrows falling every minute. Custer, on his sorrel horse Vic, rallied his 82 men, but the 3,000 warrior onslaught, backed by 7,000 chanting non-combatants, overwhelmed their defences. Custer's 82 survivors retreated to a small hill, 50 yards wide and 200 feet high, by 5:25 p.m., using 30 dead horses as barricades. Each of the 82 men carrying 8 rounds formed a 50-yard circle, firing 500 rounds in 5 minutes, wounding 10 warriors. The 2,000 warriors, 1 mile from their 1,000 lodges, responded with 800 rifle rounds and 2,000 arrows, killing 20 soldiers. Custer, his buckskin jacket bloodied, stood at the center, revolver in hand. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick in The Last Stand describes the hill as a final bastion for 82 men against 3,000 warriors, where 7,000 native voices echoed defiance. The 62 remaining troops, facing 2,000 fighters, were outmatched, with 400 rounds left against 1,500 advancing warriors. The final assault on Custer's 62 men came at 5:30 p.m., as 2,000 warriors, led by Crazy Horse's 500 Lakota, Gall's 400 Lakota, and Two Moon's 300 Cheyenne, closed a 200-yard ring. In 10 minutes, 1,000 rifle rounds and 3,000 arrows struck, killing 30 soldiers. The 32 survivors, with 5 rounds each, fired 200 rounds, wounding 5 warriors. Custer, wounded in the chest, fell beside Vic, as 2,000 warriors overwhelmed the 50-yard hill. Historian James Donovan in A Terrible Glory writes, Custer's 62 men, facing 3,000 warriors, were erased in a 10-minute storm, leaving no survivors. The annihilation of Custer's 400-man command, costing 280 lives, marked a catastrophic defeat, as 7,000 native non-combatants celebrated below. Captain Frederick Benteen's 175-man battalion, dispatched earlier to scout 10 miles south, reached Reno's 96-man position on the 100-foot bluff at 4:20 p.m., just after Reno's retreat. Benteen, in a grey campaign hat, led 120 soldiers and 55 scouts, armed with 175 carbines and 3,000 rounds. Learning of Custer's 150-man engagement 3 miles north, Benteen chose to reinforce Reno's 96 men, who faced 1,500 warriors. Historian Robert Utley in Cavalier in Buckskin critiques Benteen's decision as prudent but fatal, abandoning Custer's 150 men to 3,000 warriors. The combined 271 troops, with 5,000 rounds, formed a 300-yard perimeter, unaware that Custer's 62 men were falling 2 miles away. With Custer's 62-man command destroyed by 5:40 p.m., 1,500 warriors turned their attention to Reno and Benteen's 271 men on the bluff, 1 mile from the 1,000 lodge camp. Chiefs Gall and Two Moon led 800 riflemen, firing 400 rounds from 200 yards, wounding 10 soldiers. The 271 troops, in a 300-yard circle, returned 2,000 rounds, killing 15 warriors. Survivor accounts, cited by John Gray in Centennial Campaign, describe a relentless sniper fire from 1,500 warriors hidden in 50 ravines. Historian Evan Connell in Son of the Morning Star notes, the 271 men held a fragile line against 3,000 warriors, as 7,000 native voices fueled the assault. The 271 soldiers, with 4,000 rounds, braced for a prolonged siege. Reno and Benteen's 271 men fortified their 300-yard perimeter on the bluff, using 20 dead mules as barricades by 6 p.m. The 271 troops, armed with 250 carbines, fired 3,000 rounds in 30 minutes, wounding 20 warriors. The 1,500 warriors, positioned 200 yards away, responded with 600 rifle rounds and 1,500 arrows, killing 8 soldiers. Reno, his coat tattered, and Benteen, revolver drawn, rallied 263 survivors who dug 50 shallow trenches 2 feet deep. Historian Gregory Micknow in Lakota Noon writes, "The 271 men faced 1,500 warriors in a 1-mile standoff with 7,000 non-combatants bolstering native resolve. The 263 troops, with 3,000 rounds, held firm against 3,000 warriors as dusk fell over the 1,000 lodges." The siege of Reno and Benteen's 263 men continued until 9 p.m., with 1,000 warriors maintaining 400 yards of pressure. The warriors, led by 300 Cheyenne under 2 Moon, fired 300 rounds from 50 concealed positions, wounding 15 soldiers. The 263 troops, now 248 after 15 losses, returned 2,500 rounds, killing 10 warriors. Army reports note that 248 men had 2,000 rounds left, facing 3,000 warriors across a 1-mile front. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick in The Last Stand calls the defense a grueling ordeal, as 248 men held against 1,500 warriors' relentless probes. The 248 survivors, supported by 7,000 native non-combatants' chants, awaited relief, unaware of Custer's 280-man loss. On the 26th of June, 2,000 U.S. reinforcements under General Alfred Terry arrived at 10 a.m., halting the native assault on Reno and Benteen's 248 men. The 1,500 warriors, facing 2,248 soldiers, withdrew to their 1,000 lodge camp, 1 mile away, by noon. Terry's force, with 1,500 carbines and 50,000 rounds, secured the bluff, finding 248 survivors and 60 wounded. Historian James Donovan, in A Terrible Glory, notes, "The 2,000 reinforcements saved 248 men, but arrived too late for Custer's 280. The 248 troops, with 1,000 rounds, mourned 280 comrades, while 7,000 native non-combatants began dismantling their 1,000 lodges, signaling a strategic retreat." The Battle of the Little Bighorn cost the U.S. Army 280 lives, with 268 from Custer's 400-man command and 12 from Reno's 147-man battalion. Native losses totaled 160 warriors from a 3,000-man force, a 5% casualty rate compared to the Army's 70%. The 1,000 lodge camp, housing 10,000 people, sustained 7,000 non-combatants unharmed. Historian D. Brown in Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee writes, "The 160 native losses against 280 U.S. deaths marked a tactical victory for 3,000 warriors defending their way of life. The 248 U.S. survivors, joined by 2,000 reinforcements, faced a fleeting native triumph, as 7,000 non-combatants and 2,840 warriors withdrew, leaving a scarred battlefield." The Battle of the Little Bighorn, etched in the blood-soaked earth of Montana, left 280 U.S. soldiers and 160 native warriors dead, a stark tally of a clash that shook a nation. The Lakota and Cheyenne, with 3,000 warriors defending 7,000 kin in 1,000 lodges, secured a fleeting victory against Custer's 400-man force. Yet, this triumph, as historian D. Brown notes in Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, was a spark of defiance before the U.S. tide of conquest. The 2,000 reinforcements that saved Reno and Benteen's 248 survivors heralded a brutal retaliation, with the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty's 60,000 square miles including the sacred Black Hills seized from the Sioux. Sitting Bull's 10,000-person camp, a beacon of resistance, dispersed as 2,840 warriors and 7,000 non-combatants fled to Canada or faced U.S. pursuit. The battle's cost $280 US, lives against 160. Native losses fueled a vengeful campaign that confined the Lakota and Cheyenne to shrinking reservations. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick in The Last Stand writes, "The Little Bighorn was a native stand for survival, crushed by an empire's wrath. The 248 U.S. survivors, haunted by 280 fallen comrades, witnessed a victory that cost the Sioux their ancestral lands as 15,000 prospectors flooded the Black Hills by 1877. The courage of Crazy Horse, Gall, and Two Moon, leading 3,000 warriors against 400 soldiers, remains a testament to native resilience. Their fight, rooted in the defense of 7,000 kin, echoes through history as a cry for sovereignty. As we reflect on the 160 warriors who fell and the 2,840 who stood, what does it mean to honor a people who, against 2,000 U.S. troops, carved a moment of glory from the jaws of loss? How can their legacy inspire us to confront the shadows of conquest in our own time?